confuse and makes the point. The single word in Hebrew for what is it is manna.
Manna, right.
One word, it means what is it? And so we come back again to sort of where I began, to Moses in the desert with the golden calf and the Israelites, and of course the bread that he fed them was called manna.
That's right. And
same stuff. It's this material from burning the golden calf or whatever else they were doing at the time, and it was this strange white stuff that they said was wafting about them, and it was bread that they lived on for all of their years of wandering in the wilderness. So, not a lot of way for anybody to understand what on earth these old stories were about, whether from Egypt or whether from the Israelite culture or whether from Mesopotamia, until 1976, and modern science picked it up again. And just about everything that was ever written about it has been proved to be true, not mythology, not something that we had to interpret, but something literally to read exactly as it was written.
The reason also why I find this story so interesting is because of the importance, if you will, of gold in the ancient days. I mean, we can, for instance, talk about, if we again go back to Sitchin's story here, right? He's talking about even that the human race was developed genetically to actually mine gold for these gods, if you will. So again, the importance of having a lot of gold that actually could have something to do with, if we want to go so far, of course, but that could have something to do with transportation. It could have to do with levity or technology when it comes to building something, for instance.
All sorts of things, yeah. I mean, gold has always been enormously important. I mean, I suppose among the metals, it's attractive, it's warm, it's friendly. It has all the nice qualities about it that a lot of metals don't. But having said that, and apart from the fact that everybody loves it, it became enormously important. I mean, in the 1700s, just 300 years ago, it was introduced and became quite naturally the substance which we collected and hoarded and stored to underpin our national currencies. Well, why? A bag of diamonds would do as much as a great room full of gold. Gold is heavy, it's bulky. I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world to store at Fort Knox or the Bank of England or wherever, and yet it was so important, we determined that it was the most important substance to underpin currency. And that's kind of odd, because that's part of some sort of inherited DNA culture that just told us, I suppose, that it was the thing to store and to hoard.
Right.
Why? I mean, I've never found anybody, and I've spoken to people at the Royal Mint and where they haven't got a clue why gold was picked to do this job, but it was. And my belief is that it is still part of something that we knew from the past. Perhaps it's just locked in our ancient memory banks somewhere that kind of keeps reminding us that gold is one of the most important substances on this planet. And
it could be, and it feels like there's a relationship in a way between human beings and the gold. I mean, I think it's the only substance basically that we can determine by biting down on it, as it were, denting it, right? Isn't that so? Yeah. But
I mean, it's astonishing now. I mean, certainly in scientific journals, but medical journals particularly from all over the world, that the work with monatomic gold is now quite astounding. I mean, there's hardly a country that is into medical research that hasn't produced journal documents on various uses of monatomic gold and how they see it of being of use within medical treatments and things like that.
Yes.
So we're probably not too far away from it now. I mean, these articles have been appearing since I was involved in this back in, from the middle 1990s, but actually up until about 2003 when I wrote Lost Secrets of the Sacred Art, which is the book about it.
Yes.
I mean, we're now a few years from that. And the articles have been coming out very regularly since then, so we can't be too far away. What did happen, oddly enough, in 2003, which was just 2 months after my book was published, it came out in the March, but in the May of that year, the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington, D.C., which is the body that really sort of fronts the prospectuses for gold sales and that sort of thing. Their prospectus for that year, for the Equity Gold Trust, for the first time outside of sort of non-establishment sources, for the first time actually mentioned within the prospectus for gold sales that one of the best reasons for buying gold now was that it was going to become a primary subject, a primary substance for use in clean energy provision.
Really?
Fuel cells, and cancer treatment. Now, these are the three things that I'd written about in my book, and I'm not suggesting that they got hold of my book. You know, it takes longer than that, longer than 2 months to put together a prospectus, but
sure.
The research had been going on, you know, for a long, long time, and gradually it was coming to the fore, particularly in the area of fuel cells. This stuff has the potential to attract energy and to store energy and to distribute energy. And so we just need to watch and wait quietly from the scenes. It could be one of the things that comes up as one of our alternatives for fossil fuels eventually.
Huh.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Really interesting.
But the beauty of it is that it's superconductive, so it needs no connectors in between. I mean, you could literally have energy stored right here where I'm sitting now within a fuel cell of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I could throw the switch and start sending electrical energy to you, and you could throw on all your lights in your house or your studio, wherever you are, and start running your electrical appliances with energy coming from here with no connections, no wires or anything in between, because it will talk to itself if the resonance frequency is tuned correctly.
Really? Huh.
And it won't stop until I turn off the switch, so I'm in control now, you know. But it seems to me to be a perfect way not only of helping with, if not supplementing, but certainly of helping with the distribution of energy, however our energy is produced in the future, that gets rid of all these nasty wires and pylons and the need for repairs and things that go wrong.
Right.
You know, it could rid us of that. So, I mean, even if the substance itself isn't used to produce energy, because it doesn't actually seem to produce energy, but it will attract it, and it will store it, and it will distribute it.
Really interesting. Kind of reminds me of the old, some of the old Tesla experiments almost, and he might have been into something like that. I'm not familiar with it, with his work on gold or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the more one looks, the more one finds, and what surprises me always is how much seemingly divorced things link together.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, who would have thought that a bit in the Bible from the book of Exodus would suddenly link up with modern medical journals?
Absolutely. It's
crazy stuff, but it's the way that things go, and it seems to be what I tread on all the time and keep discovering, that these links between stuff that academia just doesn't put together for us. It doesn't seem to want to do the equation, you know?
Yeah. Well, it takes a truly kind of unique mind to dare to look at some of the connections between ancient history and what is going on today. And again, just the fact that if you have this background of or an idea that we actually are moving in cycle instead of a linear, progressive timeline like that, we can actually see that we could potentially learn quite a lot by looking back into history and actually see what they had back then. And again, this idea of an ancient technology opens up a whole can of worms, as it were, and it's really interesting.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
I mean, even in terms of, electricity is another thing. I mean, there was an expedition into Turkey back in the late 1990s by the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. And I think there were some people from Harvard or Yale there as well in this thing. There was an archaeological team went out to do some archaeological work at the what was essentially the region of King Croesus of Lydia, who was the first king to introduce gold coinage.
Mm-hmm.
Back in about 800 BC, something like that. Not tremendously old, but 800 BC.
Yeah.
And when they were out there, they were digging away at his refinery, they found that actually a lot of, well, not a lot of the coinage, but the coinage that they'd always thought in the museums and never actually tested particularly because it was gold coinage, wasn't gold coinage at all. It was electroplated.
Hmm.
And they found equipment there. They found all sorts of things which kind of proved this point. And there's an amazing book. It's I forget what it's called. The something or other of King Croesus, and it was actually written by the people from this team, and published by the British Museum in 1999 or 2000. And the intriguing thing about it is that this kind of information that we've been talking about doesn't just come from people like me. It comes from people like the British Museum. It comes from people like the University of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And they have written this extraordinary book proving, absolutely beyond doubt, that they were electroplating in 800 BC.
Incredible.
That is incredible stuff.
And you know, there
we are taught that electricity, that electroplating and electrolysis wasn't developed until the Dutch did it in the 1750s.
Yeah.
And there we are in 800 BC, and we have that. And then we go back again and we read a lot of the accounts of what we didn't understand before, and discover that it actually was electricity being used in that era. And you think, well, that's a bit weird. That ties in with something else that I read about earlier. And you discover that you move back to 1000 BC and 1500 BC, and there are all these same replicas of the same sort of story.
Yeah.
This actually ended up with the British Museum doing some tests on a number of artifacts which they had from Mesopotamia, from old Iraq, going back to 2,500 and 2000 BC, which they'd always thought were gold, and they ended up being lead, or not lead, a lead alloy with some other metals plated. So it wasn't a solid gold dagger at all. It was a plated dagger, and we're now looking at 2,500 BC. So again, you know, we're not sure. I say we. I mean, the people involved are not sure how it was done particularly, and what the process was. But things that we thought weren't even discovered or invented until very recent times were being used as an everyday occurrence back then. And so one wonders why and how and when it stopped. And why did these technologies get lost?
Yeah.
I mean, the church, I suppose, is responsible for getting in the way of a lot of things, but not technologies. You know, we get in the way of teachings and interpretations and things like that, and remove them from history books and whatever. But these technologies got lost, and that's really strange. You know, who was it one day that decided not to do it anymore?
Right. Well, exactly. It's and I mean, there's even people, if we want to get more esoteric about the subject in a way that has looked into the words, for instance. I mean, just compare the idea of money then and electricity. There's currency involved in both of them, right? You know, we're talking about the currency of electricity or the currency of money, you know, so there might be some kind of hint there, you know.
Could be, couldn't there?
Yeah.
Could be.
So
you can see now how it works. At the end of everything I've done, I end up with more questions than I started with.
Yeah, well, exactly. But that's the point in a way, it feels like. I mean, if we only ask the right questions, if it were, then things begin to open up. And I think we come to that position where you know, we end up having more questions, as you say, than answers. But that really, as I feel, this is one of the greatest adventures of life, as it were, that we discover how little it is that we actually know. But during that, you know, along that way, along that journey, we learn an incredible amount, and really basically that we're part of something really interesting here in regards to life on this planet, you know.
I mean, quite often the questions are the hardest part of the equation.
Yeah.
Harder than the answers. I got invited about 5 years ago to go across to America, to Colorado, to attend a scientific conference. And I thought, well, this is incredible stuff. You know, I'm not a scientist. Why would they invite me to go to a scientific conference? And so, not wishing to arrive there and appear uneducated by their terms, I queried it, and I said, are you sure you've got the right person here? You know, I know that the delegates at this conference are only scientists. So why would you want me there? And they explained that it was basically some things from Genesis of the Grail Kings, my second book. And they said, you posed some questions. I think they mentioned 3 questions in particular. You posed some questions in that book, which we've had the answers to for years. We just didn't know what the questions were.
Oh, really?
Isn't that interesting?
Really interesting. But and that's kind of encouraging on one level as well, that they begin to potentially look outside the box, as it were.